Hello again, friends. Welcome back to another edition of Album versus Album. Today, we're going to be talking about two more absolutely classic heavy metal albums, this time coming straight out of my home state of Texas. We're going to be talking about two albums from the legendary groove/extreme metal band Pantera. For those of you who are new to this, what I do every once in a while, I'll put a poll up on YouTube, up on my Instagram page, and also on my Twitter page. And I'll basically put two albums by the same band, usually at a similar time period in their career, and I just have everyone out there vote on which one they would choose out of the two. And then at the end, of course, I get my vote as well, of course. But this time I decided that those two albums should be the 1990 album Cowboys from Hell and the 1992 album Vulgar Display of Power. So we'll get to those votes later about how all that worked out. If you weren't a part of it, make sure you go and follow me on Instagram at oldhead.tx or on Twitter at oldheadpodcast. Yeah. Or right here, just pay attention to the feed. I think they show up in the feed somehow. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But that's how you can do it. So yeah, let's start talking about these albums. First up, let's talk about the 1990 album Cowboys from Hell. So as I said, Cowboys from Hell came out in 1990. It was produced by Terry Date, and it was the second Pantera album to feature vocalist Phil Anselmo, and it shows them making that turn into a much more extreme version of the Pantera sound. The groove element comes in. It's the most classic sounding Pantera album. For some people, it's the beginning of everything. But it is actually their fifth album. So, you know, I did an albums ranked on Pantera. If you want to know my thoughts on everything that came before this, I'll post that down below in the video description. But let's just talk about this album a little bit. It starts off with the song Cowboys from Hell, which that song's kind of a big deal because not only is it a song that people still love today, but Cowboys from Hell became the moniker that Pantera carried through the rest of their career. So there's something to be said about that already. A Stone Cold classic starting off the album. And yeah, this album is really fucking heavy. It has them really establishing that Pantera groove sound, but there's elements of other things going on. There's a little, I'm using this to indicate how much thrash is on this album. I have a weird bone to pick with people that try to lump in Pantera with other thrash bands because they're not. Because Pantera used thrash elements sparingly, sparsely, one of those words that means you use it every once in a while for a little bit. That's what Pantera did. Pretty much the only song on Cowboys from Hell that I would consider mostly thrash is the song Heresy, which fucking kicks ass. But other than that, songs like Domination and Shattered, Art of Shredding, those all just contain little bits of thrash metal, which to me does not the thrash metal band make. But they're still fucking amazing songs. And honestly, trying to lump them in with thrash metal is kind of a disservice because Pantera had their own thing going. And so I just fucking call them Pantera. I mean, they're an extreme metal band. They're dropped in that giant pool of extreme metal wherever it may go. But along with Pantera kind of solidifying their sound on this album, it also pretty much solidifies the fact that Diamond Daryl on this album is a badass guitar player that stands above pretty much any other guitar player that was going at the time. There was a lot of good guitar players around, but I don't think any of them had that style that just made them so unique and memorable at the time. Some guitar players can write guitar riffs that get stuck in your head more than the lyrics to the song get stuck in your head. And Diamond Daryl was one of those guitar players. And those kind of riffs are all over Cowboys from Hell. Not only that, but you also have an amazing sort of, I can't call it a ballad because it's only partially soft, but Cemetery Gates is a totally well-written song. It's so well performed. And on top of that, that's another thing you got to sprinkle in with your facts about Cowboys from Hell, is that it is the end of Phil Anselmo doing his high-pitched vocals. And really, if you listen to what he did on this album, it's kind of like he nailed it and went, fuck it, I don't need to do that anymore. But either way, this is the last album to really show that wide range that Phil Anselmo, I guess, used to have, because I don't really think he could do that anymore. But I mean, once you reach 50, could anybody? Never mind. I know some singers that can. Don't Rob Halford me. But since we're sort of, taking apart these albums so we can vote on them, I have to point out that there are a couple of weaker moments on the album. Psycho Holiday and Clash with Reality. They're both they're good songs, but I don't think they're up to the level of a lot of other things that are on this album. But you get to the second half of the album and you actually have some deep cuts that are really fucking good that I don't think get enough attention. Songs like Medicine Man and Message in Blood. Those are fucking killer songs, but you don't hear a lot of people talking about those songs. So yeah, there's a lot of great shit on this album. Sure, if I nitpick, I would say that the production is a little bit too treble heavy. It seems like it could use a little bit more thickness in it. That's just a nitpick. And then on top of that, knowing where Pantera ended up going with future albums, I do feel like this album out of all of them feels the most transitional. It's a very solid, well done, classic transitional album, but a transitional album it still is. So really, Cowboys from Hell falls a little bit short from the albums they did after for me, just because of that. Just because there's all these things that feel like they need to tighten up things just a little bit here and there in order for them to get to the next album that we will talk about. In this corner, we have the 1992 album Vulgar Display of Power. This is a motherfucker of an album. It is so confident and heavy. It's like a fucking statement. So I could just read the track listing instead of talking about the album, and you would get across my feelings about this album. Mouth for War, A New Level, Walk, Fucking Hostile, This Love, Rise, which seems oddly appropriate right now. But that's just the first half of the album. And all of those songs, it's like the album does not fucking let up, and it's classic song after classic song. Did I mention that it was also produced by Terry Date? It was. And the production on this album, I think, is a little bit better than Cowboys from Hell. It feels thicker. I don't know. It's punchier. I don't know. It just, I don't think I would change anything production-wise on Vulgar Display of Power. Still sounds as heavy and brutal today as it did back in 1992. Now, because I listed all of the songs off of the first half of the album, yes, I will agree the second half of the album is a little bit weaker than the first half, but that's not saying much. That's just comparing complete badass to pretty goddamn badass. So, but everyone is bringing their A game on this album. Every member of the band, still Diamond Daryl on this album, he just knows how to write the most interesting fucking heavy riffs that still sound really fresh today. And then Phil Anselmo, who, like I mentioned when we were talking about Cowboys from Hell, he has abandoned the higher pitched vocal stuff he was doing. But in my opinion, in doing that, it's almost like he forced himself to come up with kind of more interesting vocal phrasings and melodies in his range that he was doing, because there's still singing on this. It's a little more yelling going on here, but there's still parts that you could sing or shout along to, and that's a big thing about Vulgar Display of Power, is that it's catchy pretty much all the way through. I remember when this album came out, it was pretty much the heaviest thing I had ever heard, and honestly, it still kind of fills me with the same kind of adrenaline that it did back in 1992. The weakest point on the album, I may get some shit talking for this. Hollow is not an amazing song. And the fact that it closes out the album, that part is kind of a sour note, because it's a good song, but compared to the rest of the album, it's not. So I had to throw that in there because I don't just want to suck this album's dick and not, I want to be fair. So yeah, Vulgar Display of Power, amazing fucking album, classic album. Both of these albums are classic, but only one of them can walk out of here a winner. So first off, let's talk about how you all voted out there. Now, when I first posted the polls, a few hours later, these two albums were literally neck and neck, like 50% or just barely. Like it was a pretty interesting battle going on. But in the end, there was a clear winner. Over on Instagram, Vulgar Display of Power won with 54% of the vote. That was 31 votes for Vulgar Display of Power and 26 votes for Cowboys from Hell. And right here on YouTube, Vulgar Display of Power wins with 56% of the vote. That's 63 votes for Vulgar Display of Power and 54 votes for Cowboys from Hell. And then over on Twitter, which doesn't really get that much action, go follow me over there if you want to make it seem more worthwhile. Vulgar Display of Power still won anyway with 76.9% of the vote. That was 10 votes for Vulgar Display of Power and 3 votes for Cowboys from Hell. So my vote would have been for Vulgar Display of Power, but it doesn't really matter because there was a whole lot of fucking votes for Vulgar. So in the end, the total was 105 votes for Vulgar Display of Power and 83 votes for Cowboys from Hell. So there you go. The winner of this edition of Album versus Album is Vulgar Display of Power. What can I fucking say? Killer album. Anyway, thank you all for joining me for this episode. Thank you all out there for voting. If you didn't get to vote, please, like I said, pay attention to the feed on here for when the polls come up. Follow me on Instagram at oldhead.tx or on Twitter at oldheadpodcast. I'm also on Facebook at oldheadpodcast, but you can't fucking do polls there anymore. So, anyway, thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you all again very soon.